What's with this awful food? And this house is so old and dirty.
Julie barged into the room, saw some of the dishes I had prepared and set out, and hurled insults at me. I was so stunned by her behavior that I just stood there in silence. Seeing that I wasn't responding, she took it as an opportunity to continue her verbal assault. Her face was twisted with anger, and her eyes were filled with a mocking glare as she looked at me.
Well, I guess this is what you get when you're living off of poor savings.
The moment Julie uttered those words,
Who do you think you are?
Michael suddenly appeared and asked Julie, his wife, in a low voice.
What?
Julie spun around in shock. When she realized that it was her husband, Michael, standing there, her face instantly filled with panic, and she let out a short, high-pitched cry. As a result, the usually calm and gentle Michael completely lost his temper, and things began to move in a direction very different from what Julie had intended. It was truly a case of reaping what she had sown. My name is Catherine Smith, and I'm a 58-year-old homemaker. A year ago, I lost my husband, James, to illness, and now I live alone in the house filled with memories of our life together. I'm living a modest life, carefully managing the money I receive after his passing. Just a year ago, I never imagined I'd be living like this. James, who was at an age where he was thinking about retiring soon, often talked about how he wanted to travel with me after he retired. I was happy to hear that, and I was looking forward to traveling together with him. Domestic trips are nice, but I'd love to visit other countries too.
Really? I think it's safer to travel within the country. At least we won't have to worry about the language.
Well then, should we start learning a foreign language together now? I used to daydream about those post-retirement days with him. But despite our playful conversations, that dream never came true. James, who was just about to retire, suddenly fell ill, and by the time he was admitted to the hospital, it was already too late. Despite his determined fight against the illness, James passed away 6 months after the diagnosis. I was devastated by his untimely death, but what supported me through that difficult time were our 2 sons. Both of them are over 30 now, married with children of their own. My older son, Michael, married Julie, the daughter of a well-known restaurant owner, David Roberts, 2 years ago and lives in the neighboring town. My younger son, John, got married 3 years ago and had a daughter before Michael did. They both grew up to be very kind-hearted, though Michael has always been a bit more sensitive and overly concerned about his mother. When Michael got married, I made it a point to tell him, "Thank you for always thinking of me, but from now on, you should put Julie, your wife, first."
I understand, Mom, but hearing you say that to my face is a little sad.
As Michael said this with tears in his eyes, John, who was beside him, laughed and said,
It's true, Michael. You do tend to be a bit of a mama's boy, so you should watch out.
John, unlike Michael, has always been more independent. He decided to marry his wife without consulting us, and when he told us, both James and I felt a bit lonely. Looking back, John was the first to grow independent from us. Maybe it was because he grew up watching Michael's relationship with us. That's probably why I made a point to caution Michael, knowing he leaned on us a bit more emotionally.
Even John says that. That's rough. But yeah, I guess I need to be careful.
Michael said that, though he seemed to be pondering something as he muttered those words. We had this conversation in the family waiting room on Michael's wedding day. At that time, James was still with us, quietly watching our interaction with a smile on his face. Looking back, that might have been the most peaceful time for our family. Not long after Michael's wedding, James's health began to decline, and about a year later, we had a bit of a disagreement with Julie as well. Nevertheless, my sons were incredibly supportive, even though they were grieving the loss of their father too. John in particular even suggested that I move in with him.
If you're okay with it, Mom, why don't you come live with us?
Thank you, John, but I don't want to let go of the house filled with memories of your father. John lives a bit farther from the family home, and moving in with him would make his commute inconvenient. So he offered to sell the family home and have me move in with him, but I didn't want to intrude on John and his wife. Moreover, the house I'm living in now is filled with memories of James. After losing him, that house, no matter how old, became a precious treasure to me. I felt that if I let go of the house, I'd be losing everything, so I decided to decline John's offer and continue living on my own. John, ever cheerful, responded,
I understand, Mom, but if anything happens, you have to promise to rely on us.
Thank you, John. That's very reassuring. So, I continued living alone for a while, with James's memory always in my heart. But then, my life took a turn. Last month, Michael and Julie welcomed a healthy baby boy, Daniel, into the world. Suddenly, Julie began reaching out to me more frequently. Julie, coming from a family that runs a restaurant, was a very refined and delicate woman. I had only met her a few times before the wedding, but at least during those times, she treated me with great respect. Because of that, I had a positive impression of her. However, after the wedding, with everything going on with James, Julie and I didn't have much interaction. So when she suddenly called me and said that, I was utterly shocked.
Catherine, I've given birth to the heir of the Smith family. You should be grateful.
What? I was puzzled by Julie's words at that moment. Of course, I was happy about Daniel's birth, but our family is nothing like Julie's prestigious background. I didn't see the need to make a fuss just because a boy was born. That's why I was surprised by Julie's rather old-fashioned way of thinking. Looking back, maybe if I had shared my discomfort with Michael right away, things might not have escalated the way they did. But at the time, I didn't take Julie's words too seriously. To me, both Michael's and John's children are equally precious. So, just as I had done for John's child, I gave Michael and Julie a gift of $1,000 to celebrate the birth. For someone like me, living off James's savings, $1,000 is a significant amount of money. I felt a bit sorry for Michael and John, but I gave what I could afford as a gift to celebrate the birth. However, when we met later, Julie seemed dissatisfied with the gift I had given.
Catherine, I gave birth to the heir of the Smith family.
She said to me again. Even then, I still didn't quite grasp the weight of her words. Seeing my reaction, Julie looked rather displeased. I was concerned about that, but the conversation with Julie got cut short when Michael, who had stepped out, rejoined us. However, after Julie returned from her stay at her parents' house for the birth, the problem quickly came to the surface. For about 6 months, Michael and Julie seemed to be managing the hectic life of raising a child together, but then Michael had to go on a long business trip. Because of that, Michael asked me, who lives 2 train stops away, to help out with Julie.
My in-laws are really busy people, so we can't rely on them much. I'm sorry, but could you help out Julie and the baby?
Of course, Michael. Leave it to me. I gladly accepted his request. After all, I'm at home every day. Lately, I had been feeling a bit down, as everything reminded me of James, but the thought of spending time with little Daniel filled me with a sense of energy from deep within. I quickly started taking the train to Julie's place whenever she asked, helping with errands and shopping. But my excitement didn't last long. Whenever I arrived at Julie's place with the groceries, she would just take the bags from me and send me away without letting me inside. "Julie, could I see Daniel, even if just for a little bit?" After being turned away at the door several times, I finally couldn't hold back and asked Julie directly. But for some reason, Julie looked at me with irritation and said,
I just managed to put him down for a nap. If you come in, he might wake up again.
It felt as if Julie was saying that my presence was a nuisance, and it left me feeling disappointed. I helped Julie with her shopping many times, but she never once let me see Daniel. On top of that, her attitude started to get worse. I'm not currently working outside the home, and I'm generally in good health. But there are a few days each month when I simply can't get out of bed. Yet, even on those days, Julie would call on me without any hesitation.
Aren't you interested in seeing Daniel? I really need you to come over, Catherine.
Julie would use Daniel as bait to call me over, even for the smallest things, often forcing me to go despite my discomfort. But despite her bringing up Daniel, I'd end up leaving without ever seeing him. Even when she finally let me into the house, she treated me like a servant, asking me to do the dishes or the laundry. What hurt the most was when she started yelling at me if I wasn't fast enough with the chores. After this happened repeatedly, I started to wonder about her behavior and decided to talk to John about it. I didn't want to burden or worry Michael, who was away on a long business trip.
Has it been that bad? You should have told me sooner.
John said, though he hesitated and asked if I might have said something to upset Julie.
Maybe you accidentally said something that hit a nerve, Mom. Try to think about it.
Even if that's the case, I really haven't seen much of Julie. When we do meet, we barely even talk. I honestly can't think of anything. Hearing that, John sighed in frustration.
Okay, I'll look into it on my end, but just keep doing what you've been doing for now.
I'm sorry, John. I'll do that for now. Even though we couldn't come up with an answer, I continued bringing food and running errands for Julie as before. After visiting Michael and Julie's house, I subtly asked some neighbors about Julie's behavior. At that point, I was desperate for any information. I found out that Julie regularly took Daniel out for walks. This made it clear that she was intentionally keeping Daniel away from me. Realizing this made me feel incredibly sad. I was at a loss, wondering how I could build a better relationship with Julie. If only James were here right now. James was always there to listen to me. Sometimes, he'd even point out my shortcomings. He was always there to help me find answers, and he was always on my side. Of course, John listens to me too, and he helps me find answers. But at the end of the day, John is still my child. It's not that he's unreliable, but I can't help feeling a bit insecure. Even though I know I shouldn't think like this, I can't help but wish that James were by my side. Just then, I received a call from John, saying he had found out something about Julie. He even made a special trip to visit me and showed me Julie's social media account. Apparently, John's wife had discovered Julie's account. With John's help, I learned how to navigate it and access Julie's social media account. There, I saw posts about how Julie frequently took Daniel to visit and spend time with her parents. Seeing that, a wave of sadness suddenly overwhelmed me. John, I know I'm just her mother-in-law. I understand that she might not be too fond of me.
Mom.
But this is just too much. What did I ever do to deserve this? As I said that, my emotions suddenly overwhelmed me. Everything I had been holding in burst out at once. I'm her mother-in-law. I've tried to treat Julie like my own daughter. So why does she treat me like this? I knew there was no point in saying this to John, but I couldn't stop the words from coming out. All the loneliness and frustration that had been building up inside me spilled out, and before I knew it, I was crying. Seeing me like that, John's face twisted in anger. His expression was so much like James when he was angry that it took me by surprise. As he looked at me, John muttered under his breath, his voice filled with fury.
I'm going to find out what's going on from Michael.
With that, John immediately called Michael right there. We then decided to come up with a plan. A little while later, the anniversary of James's death arrived. Michael was going to return from his business trip just for the day, and everyone was set to gather at my house. In fact, today, thanks to John's suggestion, we were going to have a family discussion. Since everyone was coming together, I busied myself preparing a meal. Just then, Julie arrived with Daniel. It seemed to be his nap time, as he was sleeping soundly in Julie's arms. I couldn't help but stare at him, captivated by how adorable he was. Noticing my gaze, Julie quickly turned her body away, blocking me from seeing him. She then walked straight into the house without even greeting me. As I stood there, pained by her coldness, I suddenly heard her shrill voice from the other room.
What's with this awful food? And this house is so old and dirty.
Julie hurled those insults after looking at some of the dishes I had prepared and set out. I was so stunned by her behavior that I just stood there in silence. Seeing that I wasn't responding, she took it as an opportunity to continue her verbal assault. Her face was twisted with anger, and her eyes were filled with a mocking glare as she looked at me.
Well, I guess this is what you get when you're living off of poor savings.
The moment Julie uttered those words,
Who do you think you are?
Michael suddenly appeared and asked her in a low voice.
What?
Julie spun around in shock. When she saw Michael standing there, her face twisted in panic, and she let out a short, high-pitched cry. The truth was, Michael had returned from his business trip earlier than planned after John called him back. John had already told him about Julie's terrible behavior toward me. At first, Michael had been skeptical about what John and I had told him. But hearing Julie's words for himself, something clicked, and his usual gentle demeanor changed dramatically. As a result, the usually calm and gentle Michael completely lost his temper, and things began to move in a direction very different from what Julie had intended.
I never thought you'd treat my mother like this. What on earth were you thinking when you said that? Explain yourself.
Michael's harsh words made Julie's face flush bright red.
What? She started it by mistreating me first. I've done nothing wrong.
Julie's bold declaration left me completely bewildered, as I had no idea what she was talking about. Julie, I honestly have no idea what you're referring to. Did I do something so terrible to you? That was how I truly felt. When I nervously asked Julie about it, She responded in a condescending tone once again.
Because, Catherine, you only gave me $1,000 as a gift for Daniel's birth.
What? This time, it was my turn to be utterly shocked, my voice cracking with disbelief. Annoyed by my reaction, Julie snapped back at me in a sulky tone.
I gave birth to the heir of the Smith family, yet you gave me the same amount as you did for John's child, and she's just a girl. That's nothing but discrimination, don't you think?
Her voice was full of conviction, as if she truly believed she was being treated unfairly. Michael, exasperated by Julie's stubborn attitude, argued back.
Heir, it doesn't matter whether the baby is a boy or a girl. What bothers me more is that you've been treating my mom so terribly because of that. That's what's truly unacceptable.
Michael was furious. John, who had been quietly listening until now, also confronted Julie with an angry expression.
Mom has been cutting back on her own expenses just to help you two out. How could you treat her so horribly?
John was right. I had been paying for everything Julie asked me to buy out of my own pocket. At first, the expenses were small, but they gradually became more and more significant. That's why I eventually turned to John for advice about Julie. Hearing this, Michael's face darkened with anger. Then, in a voice louder than I'd ever heard from him, he shouted at Julie.
Julie, what's going on here? Didn't I ask you to give Mom a thank you gift? Did you pocket the money? Answer me.
Julie flinched at Michael's furious outburst, but kept her head down and said nothing. Michael stood there, breathing heavily, until he finally let out a long sigh and, in a voice as cold as ice, said to her,
Julie, I can't do this anymore. We're getting a divorce.
Julie's head snapped up at those words. But Michael refused to even look at her. A few days later, Michael and Julie met to discuss their divorce, and at Michael's request, I joined them. Julie's parents, Margaret and David, who had learned about the situation, were also present and offered me a sincere apology.
We don't know how to express our regret. We're truly sorry for the great disrespect Julie has shown you, Catherine.
David struggled to find the right words as he said that.
The thing is, Julie's grandparents, meaning my parents, were extremely biased toward the firstborn son.
Margaret and David explained that Julie's grandparents had always prioritized their eldest son and treated him as the heir, giving him special treatment.
By the time we realized it, Julie had already absorbed their way of thinking completely.
Margaret and David, along with Julie's brother, had tried to shield her from the grandparents' favoritism, but the damage had been done.
Unfortunately, Julie grew up believing that giving birth to a son entitled her to special treatment.
As I listened, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for Julie. She likely thought that by having Daniel, she would be doted on by me. After all, she was the wife of the eldest son and had given birth to the heir. However, despite that, I, as the mother-in-law, treated both Michael and John's families equally. Julie must have felt her rights were being violated and reacted with anger. She then decided to treat me like a servant, as if to assert her importance. Now Julie sat there, utterly deflated and shrinking in her seat. I couldn't help but feel sorry for her and glanced at Michael, wondering if there was a way to reconcile. But Michael, with a stern expression I had never seen before, was staring intently at Julie.
It's not just that.
Michael pulled a thick envelope from his business bag as he said that. He took out several photos and silently laid them on the table. Julie's face turned pale as she quickly glanced at the photos. When I looked at the pictures, I saw Julie walking arm in arm with multiple men.
I always trusted you, Julie, but it turns out you haven't changed at all.
Then, Michael revealed something shocking to us. Apparently, Julie had a tendency to be unfaithful even when she was dating Michael. Because of that, they had discussed breaking up multiple times. However, each time, Julie apologized, and in the end, Michael always forgave her.
When we got married, you swore you'd never cheat again, didn't you?
Yes.
Michael slowly questioned her, emphasizing each word, and Julie replied with her head down. Michael's investigation had uncovered that Julie had been unfaithful during his business trips, engaging in relationships with multiple men. To make matters worse, she lied to these men, claiming to be a single mother, and even received financial support from them. Upon hearing this, Margaret and David raised their voices in shock.
So that's what it was. That's why you kept dropping Daniel off with us so often.
It turned out that Julie had been making me do her housework, leaving Daniel with her parents, and then going out with these men. When I learned that fact, any sympathy I had for Julie disappeared instantly.
But surely you must have had a substantial amount of money at your disposal. What did you spend it on?
Actually, I lost it all in Forex trading.
At Julie's words, Michael sighed in exasperation.
You really are all over the place. That's enough.
He handed Julie the divorce papers he had already signed as he said that. Reluctantly, Julie signed the papers as well. As she handed them back to Michael, she declared,
But I'm not giving up custody of Daniel.
Hearing this, Margaret and David immediately raised their voices in protest.
Julie, what are you talking about? There's no way you can raise him on your own.
Exactly. I don't know what you're thinking, but we're not going to help you anymore.
Scolded harshly by her parents, Julie was on the verge of tears. David, looking at her coldly, then spoke with a heavy tone.
Regardless, we're disowning you. From now on, you'll have to live on your own.
With that, it was decided that Julie, burdened with debt, wouldn't be able to raise Daniel, and custody was awarded to Michael. Afterward, Julie was indeed cut off from her family and ended up deep in debt. Moreover, Julie was discovered to be married by the men she had been involved with, and they have sued her for fraud, demanding compensation. It was a rather unsatisfying conclusion, but it was the result of Julie's actions. In the end, it was a case of reaping what she had sown. Meanwhile, Michael told me he had decided to move back into the family home after finishing his long business trip.
I know it's a lot to ask, Mom, but I need your help raising Daniel. Luckily, my boss is very understanding, and he's arranged for me to be transferred to a more family-friendly department, so I'm determined to make this work.
I smiled at Michael, who was determined and full of resolve, and said, "Don't worry, I don't consider it a burden at all. In fact..." I started to speak, but then paused, the words catching in my throat. That's it. Since James passed away, this is what I've been longing for, to live for someone else. That's why I silently complied with all of Julie's unreasonable demands. Julie's behavior spiraled out of control, largely because of her own issues, but there's no denying that my failure to set proper boundaries was also part of the problem. With that in mind, I firmly told Michael, "I'll do whatever I can to help, but I'll need some time for myself too. For some reason, Michael seemed relieved and smiled.
Of course, Mom. I want you to cherish your own life too, in place of Dad.
As Michael said this, I noticed his eyes were slightly teary. It was then that I realized just how much Michael and John had been worried about me. You're right, James. It looks like I won't be joining you just yet. I whispered softly to James in my heart. I still have someone irreplaceable in my life. Daniel was sleeping soundly in Michael's arms then. I have resolved to live my life fully so that I can watch him grow up healthy and strong.